The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through all the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." The Gospel of the Lord. There's a saying, maybe you've heard it, patience is a virtue. Well, I'm sure whatever well-meaning person first came up with that had every good intention in mind, but I'm sorry to say that by that assertion, I'm not very virtuous. It's no secret that I'm not exactly a patient person. Whether I'm waiting for a red light to change green or obsessively checking the DoorDash delivery tracker for my food, my inner and sometimes outer monologue is screaming, "Hurry up." Now, I could blame, at least in part, our increasingly digitally connected world where practicing patience isn't always easy. Amazon Prime has spoiled us with free delivery in 1 to 2 days, and sometimes even within a few hours. Standard shipping of 3 to 5 business days might as well be an eternity. And virtually any movie or TV show you could possibly want to watch is as easy as a couple taps away on your remote or your iPad. Gone are the days of actually waiting for Netflix to send you a physical DVD, let alone going to the video rental store, if any still exist, and hoping that they have the latest blockbuster in stock. And for most of us, text messages and emails with instantaneous notifications are never further away than our own pockets. If someone doesn't respond within a few hours or a few minutes, our imaginations rush to the worst possible scenario. Are they okay? Patience, it seems, is a lost virtue of a bygone era. Instead, our culture is programmed for instant gratification. So what sage advice does Jesus have to offer about waiting and being patient? Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing, he says. Today, right now, in this time and place, so much for patience. Talk about instant gratification. But the truth is, the people who heard Jesus' instantaneously fulfilled words of promise had been waiting, and for quite some time, in fact. The people of Israel had been waiting all through the days of the exile. Will it ever end? The people had waited in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah when they returned from exile to a city and a temple in ruins. How will we ever rebuild? And now they were waiting yet again under the occupation of the Roman Empire. It seems like anytime we have to wait for something or someone, our minds start racing and coming up with all sorts of scenarios and questions. In the waiting, the people had all sorts of ideas for the kind of Messiah who would come and save them. What kind of Messiah will this be? What will they look like? What will they say? What will they do? So it probably took them a bit by surprise when they heard Jesus, Mary and Joseph's kid from down the block, told them that he was the Messiah today, just like that. Now, of course, a certain amount of skepticism is natural and maybe even healthy. They had been waiting a long time, and, well, what if this Messiah never came? Their doubts and worries and fears bubbled to the surface. In the waiting, all the ideas they had for their Messiah got moved to the back burner, out of sight, out of mind. We've been doing our own waiting, and a lot of it lately. Think back to March of 2020, when we all thought that we'd only have to wait 3, maybe 4 or 5 weeks for this coronavirus to pass. We waited expectantly for a vaccine. Then we waited in lines and online for testing and vaccine appointments. We waited, perhaps not so patiently, for the chance to see loved ones in person again, for the day when we'd be back to church together in our sanctuary, for life to go back to normal. Nearly 2 years later, we're waiting again for positivity rates to slow, for a return to in-person worship and Bible study. We're waiting and waiting and waiting. And frankly, we're running low on patience, if we even have any left at all. Then, in the waiting, all of a sudden, when it's least expected, comes this stunning declaration. Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Today is good news for the poor. Today is release for the captives. Today is liberation for the oppressed. Today is the fulfillment of everything you've waited for so long. Maybe it looks a little different than they expected. Maybe it looks nothing like what they expected. Maybe it's enough to make them want to push Jesus off a cliff. It's next week's story. God's good news is always jarring and unpredictable like that. Even when it looks a little different or nothing at all like what we expected, that doesn't make it any less good news. Now, of course, the inbreaking of God's good news also doesn't necessarily mean that all of the bad news suddenly just goes away either. Hearing the Torah read in their presence was a joyful reunion for a people returning from exile, but it didn't make the reality of a city and temple in ruins yet to be rebuilt any less painful. Hearing Jesus publicly and boldly claim his role as God's Messiah was a long hoped-for promise coming true, but it didn't make the reality of political occupation and oppression go away overnight. Seeing case numbers go down and vaccine rates go up is indeed a breath of fresh air for us who are so weary from the weights of the last 2 years. But it doesn't mean the pandemic is over and we can let down our guard and our masks just yet. The inbreaking of God's good news doesn't necessarily mean that all of that suddenly goes away. But the opposite is also just as true. The bad stuff doesn't take away from the power and the promise of God's good news either. Today, this scripture is fulfilled in our hearing. Today, God's good news is for us today. Not tomorrow, not some far-off day in the future, but today, starting now and every day. Even as the pandemic continues, even as the forces of injustice and evil rage, even as we worship from our homes, no matter what we're going through or how we're feeling. Because this good news today doesn't depend on us. It is God's gift to us and God's action for us. It is liberation and freedom from all that oppresses us and weighs us down. It is God's promise that the bad stuff, whatever it is, does not and will not get the final word. As a friend of mine wrote this week, in the midst of all the reactions, protests, tears, joy, and wondering, the promise of God persists, as it always does. The promise of God persists. The promise of God is today. The promise of God is now. Instant gratification, and so much more than that.